Welcome everybody to these Illustrator tutorials for Indes 130. Today we're going to be talking about some of the basics of Adobe Illustrator. So the first thing you'll need to be able to do is to create a new document. In order to do that, you go to File, click New, and this pulls up the new document window. So that allows you to title your new document. You can choose the size under Profile. You'll see there's a bunch of different options. You'll most likely be working just with print, things that you'll print out. And under print you'll see the size has a bunch of different presets, and you can also make custom sizes. The units right now is set to points. You can choose whatever is most familiar to you. I'm going to go with inches. And you can see the orientation here, landscape or profile. I'm going to go with profile. Now down here in the advanced controls, you won't need to worry too much about right now. It's just selecting the color mode, which we'll talk about in a second, and then the raster effect, which is Adobe Illustrator uses vectors, which means it doesn't determine the size of a shape based on pixels. But if you were to export something and open it in Photoshop, you would need to have a certain amount of pixels per inch. Photoshop works with pixels. And so this allows you to select what the pixels per inch will be, but we'll get to that in later lessons. So click OK, and I've got this new document here. So in order to get right into it and just start creating shapes, there's a couple of tools that you're going to want to know. First is the line segment tool right here. Now this allows you to click and drag and create a shape or a line wherever you want. You can also click once and choose the angle, the direction that line is going to be, and the length of it. And as soon as you make something, you're going to want to be able to move it around and adjust it, and that's where these selection tools come in handy. So this first one is the selection tool, the second is the direct selection tool. Now the selection tool allows you to select an object and drag it around just by clicking and dragging. If you hover by the corners, you see that you can rotate it. And these other boxes allow you to stretch it and skew it in different ways. So there's a couple of key commands that you can use while you're creating lines or shapes that become very useful. The first one is Shift. So if I hold down Shift, when I'm drawing a line, it will snap to 45-degree angles. So I can draw perfect straight lines, I can draw lines at perfect angles, and whatever you want. Also, if you hold Shift while you're rotating an object, you can see that it does the same thing. Or while you're scaling an object, it will make sure that it keeps the same scale and proportions. If you hold down Alt while you're creating a line, it will draw the line from the center of where you click. So you can see it's coming out of both sides of where I clicked, and I can hold Shift and it will snap to those 45-degree angles as well. Now the direct selection tool allows you to select a specific point. You'll see there are these two control points on this line, and it allows me to select just one of those and move that around while keeping the other point stationary. And only the direct selection tool can do that, and that'll become a little bit more useful when we go down to the next tool, which is the shape tool. So if you click and hold on any tool with these little arrows at the bottom corner, it will bring up a submenu of options under that tool. So under the shape tool, I'm going to create a rectangle here. And I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt, so it makes a perfect square from the center. And then selecting my direct selection tool, which is keyboard shortcut A, and the selection tool is V. So using direct selection tool, I can select just one of these corners and manipulate this. And that becomes very useful, being able to manipulate shapes, not having to move the whole thing, but just specific points. And then if I switch to the selection tool, I can then rotate that, scale that however I want. So now I've got this shape here, and I want to be able to kind of adjust its appearance. I don't want it to just be a black line. So up here we have the stroke and the fill. The stroke is the color of the line itself. So I can change that to this kind of reddish orange, you can see, and then with this little window I can select and adjust the width of that line, which is the stroke. So I can make a thicker stroke, I can thin it up, or I can make no stroke at all. I want some stroke on there. So I've got this shape, and then I can also, with the next window over, I can fill that shape with a specific color. And it doesn't have to be the same color as the stroke. So you can see I have this green line and this yellow stroke. And this is something that is good to address now. You'll see sometimes you will accidentally double click on something, and that will bring you into the submenu, which isn't so much of an issue now, but when you have a lot of shapes, if you accidentally double click on one of them, it'll only let you edit the shape that you've double clicked on. You can see here that you're in a kind of sub layer, and it's only letting me work with this shape. I can double click to get out of that, and we'll talk about that again when we have multiple shapes. So with this I can adjust the fill color. I can even get rid of the stroke completely and just have the fill, or I can do the opposite, have a stroke and no fill. So we see with these top menus you can adjust the color with these preset color swatches. Now over here to the right we can do some further fine-tuning with the colors. We can adjust specific colors. So I'm going to get rid of the stroke, and I'm just going to adjust the fill here. So, being that we made the document with a CMY color palette, there are 4 different color sliders that you can use to adjust and fine-tune the color of your shape. If you go to this little menu here, you can do RGB, which has 3 different color sliders. It makes adjusting your color a little less complicated sometimes. Or you can do HSB, which is adjusting the color, the saturation, and the brightness of that. And so that's just your preference, whatever you think is most useful, easiest to understand, quickest to use. There's multiple ways you'll find to do everything in Illustrator, and it's mostly about finding what is quickest and easiest for you. And so by using those sliders you can adjust the color, and by going down here you can also click on this color spectrum and kind of get a general selection for a color that you want, and then you can go ahead and fine-tune those colors here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is layers. One of the great features of Illustrator is being able to make multiple layers on one page. So if we go down here to this Layers tab, we can see I've got one layer, and that's what this shape is on. And I'm going to make a new layer by going down to this, Create New Layer. New layer pops up above it, and you can order the layers however you want. And so the layer that's on the bottom, imagine it being on the bottom of a stack of papers. So this next layer is on top, so anything that I draw will be on top of that first shape. I'm just going to make a bunch of random shapes here. Okay, so I've got all these shapes, And I realize I don't want this one to be on the same layer as these other green ones. I'm going to change its color, and I want it to be on its own layer, so I can go ahead and create a new layer, and then if I open this second layer, I can, by clicking on this, it'll highlight it in here, and I can take this piece and drag it to the new layer, and you'll see that the color of the layer matches the outline color of the shape. So you can tell what's on which layer by clicking on it and paying attention to the color of kind of like this editing box that pops up and seeing which layer that corresponds to. Oops. One keyboard shortcut that you'll quickly need to learn is just the going backwards and forwards. So if I want to undo something, for Mac it's Command Z, and for Windows I believe it's Control Z. That allows you to go back and undo things that you've done, or Shift Control Z allows you to go forward in time. So Control Z is step backwards, Shift Control Z is step forwards. And so I've got this lovely composition here, and I want to save that. So what I'm going to do is File, Save. You can choose specifically where you want to save it. You can name it. It'll ask you which version of Illustrator. Usually it'll just be CS6, unless you're saving it for somebody that has an earlier version of Illustrator. But mostly it'll just be saving it as CS6. Click OK, and it is saved. And so those are kind of the basic tools that you'll need in order to get started, being able to create a new document, create lines and shapes, adjusting the color and the size of those shapes, and being able to organize your work on your page with layers.